What if your life does not need a miracle? What if it needs something far less dramatic and far more difficult? 90 days of honesty, 90 days of discipline, 90 days where you stop asking whether you feel ready and start acting like the person you keep saying you want to become. Because this is the uncomfortable part. A lot can change in 90 days. Your body can change. Your habits can change. Your standards can change. The way you think, the way you speak to yourself, the way you spend your mornings, the way you handle pressure, the way you walk into a room, all of that can change. So if it doesn't change, then the question becomes heavier. What are you protecting by staying the same? That is where this episode begins. Not with motivation, but with a decision. A real one. The kind that forces you to stop negotiating with the part of you that keeps postponing your life. Because the next 90 days will pass anyway. They will not wait until you feel more inspired. They will not slow down so you can keep drifting. They are coming, whether you use them or waste them. And if you live them with intention, they can rebuild more than you think. They can break a pattern you have been carrying for years. They can pull you out of mental fog. They can make you stronger, calmer, sharper, and harder to recognize in the best possible way. But only if you stop treating change like a wish and start treating it like a structure. So let's begin with the first rule. The first rule, 90 days is enough to rebuild a life. 90 days is not a small amount of time. It only feels small when you are looking at it from the outside or when you are used to thinking about change as something huge and distant. But if you live 90 days with structure, attention, and discipline, that's long enough to interrupt an old identity and begin building a new one. That matters, because one of the easiest ways to stay stuck is to keep thinking change must take forever. The mind uses that belief as an excuse. It says real transformation is too far away, too complex, too overwhelming. So instead of beginning seriously, you delay. You try a little, stop a little, hope a little, then wonder why nothing deep is moving. But 90 days is enough to prove something to yourself. It is enough time to wake up differently, enough time to stop feeding a destructive habit, enough time to build a routine your old self would have resisted, enough time to change how you think under pressure, enough time to become more disciplined than emotional, more intentional than reactive, more grounded than scattered. Not perfect, different. That is the point. You are not trying to finish your whole life in 90 days. You are trying to change its direction, and direction is everything. A ship can travel for months in the wrong direction just because the angle was never corrected. Life works the same way. Once the direction changes, the future begins changing with it, even before the final destination appears. That is why this rule is so important. You need to stop underestimating what focused time can do. A person can stay trapped for years, not because they are incapable, but because they never give themselves one season of real seriousness. One clean stretch of time where excuses are cut down, priorities are simplified, and the mind is told clearly, we are not drifting now, we are rebuilding. That kind of commitment creates momentum. At first, the change may look small from the outside. Better mornings, better choices, less noise, more self-control, more follow-through. But inside, something much bigger is happening. You are teaching yourself that your life can move when your standards become stronger than your moods. And once you learn that, you stop seeing yourself the same way. That is why 90 days matters. Not because it is magic, but because it is long enough to create evidence. Evidence that you can keep promises to yourself. Evidence that discipline can become normal. Evidence that a different version of you is not imaginary. It is built through repetition, and 90 days gives repetition time to become identity. So do not look at this as a challenge for entertainment. Look at it as a line in the sand. 90 days of living with more intention than excuses. 90 days of choosing what strengthens you over what weakens you. 90 days of building a life that feels less accidental and more earned. That is enough to rebuild more than you think. The second rule. One protected hour can change your direction. You do not need to control your entire day to start changing your life. You need 1 hour that belongs to you. That is what makes this rule so powerful. One protected hour may not sound dramatic, but if it is used well, it can quietly separate the version of you that stays the same from the version of you that keeps moving forward. Because here is what usually happens when life is left unguarded. The day begins, and immediately your attention is gone. Messages, noise, other people's urgency, unfinished thoughts, little distractions that do not look dangerous on their own, but together they eat your direction piece by piece. By the time evening comes, you feel busy, maybe even tired, but not built. A lot happened around you, but very little happened for you. That is why one protected hour matters so much. It is an act of self-respect. It is you deciding that no matter how chaotic life feels, there will still be a space in the day where your future gets more of you than your distractions do. And that changes something deep inside you, because once you protect 1 hour consistently, you stop living as if your life is something you will get to later. You begin proving in a very practical way that your growth is not just a nice idea you talk about when you're in the mood. It becomes scheduled, defended, given a place of honor. That is where things start becoming real. This hour is not for drift. It is not for random scrolling, emotional wandering, or seeing how you feel. It is for the work that changes your direction, the reading that sharpens your mind, the training that strengthens your body, the writing that clears your thinking, the plan that gives shape to your next move, the skill that compounds over time, the quiet work your future keeps waiting for while the rest of life tries to distract you. 1 hour a day may look small from the outside, but across 90 days, it becomes something serious. It becomes proof. Proof that you can stay with something. Proof that your discipline is not imaginary. Proof that your better life is not waiting on some perfect season to begin. And what makes this even more powerful is that 1 honest hour often changes the rest of the day too. Not because it magically fixes everything, but because it changes your posture. You carry yourself differently when you know the day already contains something meaningful that you protected. You become less available for mental chaos because part of you has already done something intentional. That matters. A protected hour also teaches you something uncomfortable but necessary. The problem is often not that there is no time. The problem is that time is being surrendered too easily, given away in fragments, leaked through habits that feel harmless until you add them up. A few minutes here, a little distraction there, a little delay, a little avoidance, and by the end of the week, your best energy has been spent on things that did not strengthen your life at all. This rule interrupts that pattern. It says, no, this hour is not negotiable. That kind of boundary builds presence. It builds seriousness. It teaches your mind that your priorities are not soft suggestions anymore. They have a place. And once something has a place, it becomes much harder to keep postponing it with excuses that once sounded convincing. Now, the key here is protection, not just using an hour if one happens to appear, protecting it, guarding it from the things that always try to take it. That may mean waking earlier, turning your phone off, closing the door, saying no, preparing the night before. It may require some friction at first, but that friction is part of the training. You are teaching yourself that what matters will no longer be left exposed to whatever mood or interruption arrives first. That is maturity. And there is another reason this hour matters. It helps you stop living emotionally. A day without structure easily becomes a day ruled by impulse. But a day that contains 1 protected hour begins from a different place. It tells your mind very early that discipline comes first and feelings can come after. That is a major shift, because once you stop asking whether you feel like doing the important work and start giving it a fixed place in your day, your identity starts changing. You stop seeing yourself as someone who is trying to do better. You start becoming someone who trains, studies, builds, thinks, or creates as part of who they are. That is how lives change quietly, not always through giant decisions, but through the same defended hour, repeated often enough that it starts reshaping your standards from the inside. So if 90 days feels big, bring it back to this. You are not being asked to master your whole life at once. You are being asked to protect 1 hour and tell the truth with how you use it. 1 hour for the life you say you want. 1 hour for the person you say you are becoming. 1 hour where the future gets your best attention before the world starts spending it for you. That is not small. That is how direction begins. The third rule: win the morning before the world enters your mind. Morning matters because it sets the emotional tone of everything that follows. If the first part of your day belongs to noise, reaction, distraction, and urgency, then your mind begins the day in a borrowed state. You are already responding before you have even chosen who you want to be. The world enters first, and once that happens, it becomes much harder to recover your center later. That is why winning the morning is not about being impressive. It is about protecting your mind before the day starts making demands on it. You do not need a perfect ritual. You do not need a cinematic routine. What you need is a beginning that belongs to you. A beginning that reminds your mind, before the phone, the messages, the pressure, and the noise arrive, that your inner state is not supposed to be public property. That changes a lot. Because when the morning begins with intention, the rest of the day feels different. You are less scattered, less easy to rush, less likely to let random inputs decide your mood. Something in you stays steadier because the day did not begin with intrusion. It began with direction, and that direction compounds. A strong morning can be simple. Wake up without immediately reaching for distraction. Sit with your mind before handing it away. Move your body. Read something that sharpens you. Write something that clears you. Review what matters. Step into the day as someone who has already met himself before meeting everyone else. That is power. Not loud power, quiet power, the kind that comes from not letting the first voice in your head belong to the outside world, the kind that makes you harder to emotionally hijack later, because the day already started from a place of self-command instead of reactivity. This is one of the reasons mornings get wasted so easily. They do not look dangerous. A little checking, a little scrolling, a little drifting, a little delay. Nothing dramatic, but the damage is subtle. You start the day consuming before creating, reacting before choosing, absorbing before anchoring. And once that becomes normal, it is hard to understand why your focus feels weaker than it should. The morning explains a lot. It reveals whether you are entering the day from clarity or from exposure. It shows whether your attention is being directed or spent. It teaches your nervous system what kind of posture to take toward life. If you begin with hurry, the whole day can feel hurried. If you begin with steadiness, the day has a better chance of staying in your hands. This is why Stoicism would care so much about the first hour. Not because of productivity for its own sake, but because the mind is more impressionable there. It is cleaner, quieter, and less defended. What enters early often stays with you longer. So if you let chaos in first, chaos gets the first claim on your energy. If you let discipline in first, discipline shapes the day from beneath everything else. That is why winning the morning is really about authorship. You are deciding that the day will not begin by accident. You are deciding that your first thoughts, your first actions, and your first attention will not be handed away without a fight. And once you do that for enough days in a row, something starts changing. You feel less dragged by life, more positioned inside it. So protect the morning. Do not let the world enter your mind before you do. Give yourself a beginning that strengthens you before the day starts testing you. Even if it is brief, let it be deliberate. Let it tell the truth about the person you are trying to become. because the way you begin the day has a quiet way of deciding what kind of day you are likely to live. The fourth rule, discipline over mood. Stop asking how you feel. This is where real change becomes uncomfortable, because as long as your progress depends on your mood, your life will keep moving in fragments. On the good days, you feel ready, clear, motivated. You want to work, improve, train, focus, and take yourself seriously. But then another day comes, energy drops, emotion shifts, the mind feels heavy, and suddenly the standard falls with the feeling. That is the problem. If your actions keep changing with your mood, then your future never gets to trust you. And that is exactly why discipline matters. It frees your life from the constant instability of how you happen to feel in the moment. It teaches you to act from decision, not from emotional weather. That is a completely different way to live. Because mood is always moving. Some mornings you will feel sharp, some mornings you will feel flat. Some days you will feel powerful, and other days you will feel resistance before you even begin. If you keep asking your feelings for permission, you will keep handing them more authority than they deserve. Discipline interrupts that. It says, "I hear how I feel," but that is not the final voice. That is a powerful line to cross. The moment you stop asking, "Do I feel like doing this?" and start asking, "What does this day require from me?" something in your character begins to harden in the right way. You stop living like someone who needs to be emotionally convinced every morning. You begin living like someone who understands that certain things must be done, whether the feeling is there or not. That is how standards become real, not when they are easy, not when your mood supports them, when they hold anyway. And honestly, this is where self-respect starts becoming visible, because every time you keep your word to yourself on a day that feels flat, you build something. You prove that your future is not at the mercy of a passing mood. You prove that the person you are becoming is stronger than the temporary state you woke up in. That is not glamorous, but it is life-changing. A lot of people wait to feel better so they can act better. Discipline teaches the reverse. Act better, and your life starts becoming more stable whether the mood cooperates or not. You do not need to feel perfect to keep a promise. You need structure. You need standards. You need the ability to move before emotion starts negotiating everything downward. This does not mean becoming mechanical or cruel with yourself. You are still human. You still need rest, recovery, and honesty about your limits. But there is a difference between intelligent rest and emotional surrender. One restores you. The other keeps you weak while sounding gentle. That difference matters. So when the mood is low, do not immediately lower the standard. Keep the appointment. Do the hour. Move your body. Sit down with the work. Hold the line in at least one important place. Maybe not with dramatic intensity, but with consistency. Because discipline is not built on your best days. It is built on the days when you would rather not, and you still do something that keeps your direction intact. That is the fourth rule. Stop asking your mood to lead your life. Let it pass through you if it needs to, but do not hand it command. Because the person who learns to act without needing to feel ready becomes very difficult to stop. The fifth rule, cut what keeps you weak. This rule asks for honesty, because not everything hurting your life looks dramatic. Some things weaken you quietly. A habit you keep excusing, a distraction you keep calling harmless, a person who keeps draining your clarity, a routine that leaves you dull, a pattern that steals your energy a little at a time until you start thinking this lower version of yourself is just who you are now. That is how weakness survives, not always through collapse, but through permission. You let it stay because it is familiar, because cutting it off feels inconvenient, because part of you keeps saying it is not that serious, but deep down, you usually know. You know what leaves you foggy. You know what makes your standards softer. You know what keeps eating your attention, your discipline, your sleep, your self-respect, or your momentum. And if you are serious about changing your life in 90 days, you cannot keep protecting the very thing that keeps weakening you. That is the real issue. A lot of people want transformation while keeping their favorite escape. They want clarity without giving up what clouds them. They want discipline while still feeding the habits that make discipline harder. They want a stronger mind while still giving daily access to whatever keeps their mind scattered. It does not work that way. Growth often begins less with adding something new and more with removing what keeps pulling you backward. Sometimes the next level of your life is not waiting on another technique. Sometimes it is waiting on one clean decision to stop making room for what is quietly ruining your strength. That decision has power in it, because the moment you cut something weak out of your life, your energy starts returning to you. Not all at once, but noticeably. The mind becomes less crowded. The day becomes less slippery. Your focus has less to fight through. And even before the outside results fully change, something inside you starts feeling more solid because you are no longer cooperating with your own decline. That matters. This is also where self-respect becomes visible, not in what you say you want, but in what you are willing to remove in order to become it. Anyone can talk about discipline when nothing costly is being asked. But when the thing weakening you is also the thing comforting you, entertaining you, distracting you, or numbing you, now the conversation becomes real. Now you have to choose. Do you want relief, or do you want strength? Do you want the habit, or do you want the future it keeps delaying? Do you want to keep calling it small, or are you finally willing to admit that repeated weakness is never small when it is shaping your whole life? That is the fifth rule. Cut what keeps you weak. Not in theory, in practice. Remove what lowers your standard, drains your attention, or keeps teaching your mind that comfort matters more than growth. Stop negotiating with what already proved it cannot stay without costing you something important. Because once you stop feeding what weakens you, the stronger version of you finally has room to breathe. The sixth rule: stop escaping the pain that keeps repeating. There is a kind of pain that does not leave because it is still stronger than you. It stays because you keep walking around it. You distract yourself, delay the conversation, numb the feeling, fill the day, change the subject, tell yourself you will deal with it later. For a while that can feel like relief, but it is not relief. It is postponement. And postponed pain has a way of returning with more control over your life than it had before. That is why this rule matters so much. The pain you keep escaping usually becomes the pattern that keeps repeating. The same insecurity, the same emotional trigger, the same self-sabotage, the same weakness showing up in different clothes. From the outside, it can look like life keeps sending you the same problem, but very often the deeper truth is that the lesson stayed because the wound was never faced directly. Stoicism does not let you build a strong life on avoidance. It asks you to turn toward what you keep running from. Not all at once, and not in a dramatic way, but honestly. To ask yourself what you have been using comfort, distraction, or busyness to avoid. Because whatever you refuse to face usually starts shaping you from the background. And that background influence is expensive. It affects your focus, it affects your standards, it affects your relationships, it affects the way you speak to yourself when pressure rises. You may think you are avoiding one feeling, but that feeling is quietly entering everything. This is why facing pain is not weakness, it is cleanup. It is you deciding that the hidden thing will no longer keep managing your behavior from behind the scenes. It is you choosing truth over temporary escape. And yes, that takes courage, because sometimes the pain is not just sadness. Sometimes it is shame. Sometimes it is grief. Sometimes it is the uncomfortable realization that you have been helping your own stagnation for longer than you wanted to admit. Sometimes it is seeing clearly that a habit, a person, or an emotional dependence has had more power over you than you wanted to believe. But that honesty is where freedom begins. The thing you face can finally be worked with. The thing you keep escaping stays larger in your mind than it may actually be in reality. That is what avoidance does. It protects you from discomfort in the short term, then hands you a heavier life in the long term. So if you want these 90 days to change you, you cannot keep making room for the same old escapes. You have to sit with what hurts long enough to understand it, name it, study it, feel it without immediately reaching for relief. Let it tell you what it has been trying to tell you, because the pain you face begins to lose some of its control. And the pain you keep escaping keeps writing parts of your future without asking you first. That is the 6th rule. Stop running from what keeps returning. If it repeats, it is asking to be met. The 7th rule. Train your mind, or it will turn against you. Your mind is never neutral for long. If you do not train it, it does not simply stay empty and harmless. It starts drifting toward whatever is strongest in the moment. Fear, habit, distraction, resentment, comfort, comparison, old stories, old wounds. And after enough time, you start living under the weight of a mind that should have been serving you, but is now quietly working against you. That is where this rule becomes serious, because a weak mind does not always look weak from the outside. Sometimes it looks normal. It looks like constant doubt, constant delay, constant overthinking, constant emotional reaction, constant internal noise. It looks like waking up with good intentions and then getting pulled away by the same patterns again. It looks like wanting better for yourself while still being mentally ruled by whatever feels urgent, easy, or familiar. That is not a character flaw. It is usually a training problem. The mind follows what it rehearses. If it keeps rehearsing fear, fear becomes faster. If it keeps rehearsing excuses, excuses become more believable. If it keeps rehearsing distraction, focus becomes harder to hold. And if it keeps rehearsing self-defeat, then even good opportunities begin getting filtered through the same tired lens. That is why training your mind matters so much. You are not only trying to think positive, you are trying to become harder to control from the inside. You are trying to build a mind that does not panic so easily, does not collapse so quickly, does not obey every passing thought as if it were truth. That kind of mind has to be built on purpose. It is built in what you read. It is built in what you repeat to yourself. It is built in what you allow your attention to dwell on. It is built every time you interrupt a thought that would have once ruled your whole day. This is what Stoicism understands so well. The mind must be governed, not suppressed, not hated, not ignored, governed. You have to watch what it does when pressure rises. You have to notice where it exaggerates, where it lies, where it turns discomfort into drama, where it turns one hard moment into a whole story about your identity or your future. That observation is part of the training, because once you can see the mind clearly, you stop becoming it so quickly. You stop assuming every thought deserves belief. You stop letting one low moment define the day. You stop letting fear speak as if it were prophecy. That alone changes a lot. And there is something else here that matters. A trained mind creates stability before results appear. It keeps you moving through flat days, through doubt, through boredom, through pressure, through the moments where nothing external is rewarding you yet. Without that inner training, the person gives up too early. Not because the path was wrong, but because the mind was too undisciplined to stay with it. So this rule is not optional if you are serious about real change. Train your mind every day. Challenge what weakens it. Feed what sharpens it. Refuse to let old mental habits keep writing the script. Catch the thought before it becomes the mood, and catch the mood before it becomes the decision. Because if you do not train your mind, it will train you into whatever pattern you repeat most. And if you do train it, then slowly, quietly, it stops being your biggest obstacle and starts becoming one of your strongest allies. The 8th rule, design your environment. So discipline becomes easier. Willpower is useful, but it is not supposed to carry your whole life alone. If your environment keeps pulling you toward distraction, comfort, weakness, and delay, then even a sincere person will struggle more than necessary. That is not because the goal is impossible. It is because the setup is working against the effort. And that matters more than it seems. A lot of change fails in ordinary places. On the desk that makes distraction easy. In the room that invites laziness. In the phone that stays close enough to steal attention every few minutes. In the daily setup that keeps placing temptation within reach and then asking discipline to fight it every hour. That is exhausting. If you are serious about changing in 90 days, then your environment cannot stay neutral. It has to start helping the version of you that you are trying to build. It should reduce friction where good action is needed and increase friction where old weakness used to move too easily. That is a powerful shift. Because once the environment changes, discipline stops feeling like a daily battle against 10 different traps. It becomes easier to do what is right because the path has fewer hidden obstacles. The good choice is more visible. The bad choice is less convenient. Your standards are not only living in your head anymore, they are starting to appear in the structure around you. That is how real change becomes more stable. If you want to read more, the book should be easier to reach than the distraction. If you want to train, your clothes and your plan should already be waiting. If you want to focus, your space should stop inviting interruption. If you want to stop feeding a bad habit, it should not stay close enough to win through convenience alone. These things sound small, but they are not small at all. They shape behavior quietly. They decide how much resistance you feel before the action even begins. They either support your future or keep making weakness easy. This is why environment design is not laziness. It is wisdom. You are not avoiding discipline. You are respecting it enough to stop wasting it. You are understanding that self-control becomes stronger when your surroundings stop sabotaging it every hour. Stoicism would respect that kind of realism. It is not about pretending to be invincible. It is about seeing clearly what influences you and then arranging life so your better self has a real chance to lead. That includes people too. The environment is not only physical, it is also relational. The tone around you matters. The habits around you matter. The conversations you keep staying near matter. If something repeatedly weakens your mind, lowers your standards, or pulls you back into an older version of yourself, then it belongs in this conversation too. So this rule asks you to become more intentional about the world around you. Look at your room. Look at your routines. Look at what stays within reach. Look at what keeps interrupting you. Then ask a cleaner question. Does this setup help the person I am trying to become, or does it keep helping the version I am trying to leave behind? That question can change a lot, because once your environment starts working with you instead of against you, discipline becomes less dramatic and more consistent. And consistency is what turns 90 days from a hopeful idea into a real transformation. The 9th rule: guard your attention like your future lives there. Your attention is not a small thing. It is one of the most expensive things you own, because whatever keeps getting your attention keeps shaping your life. Day after day, your focus is deciding what grows inside you. Clarity or confusion, strength or weakness, direction or drift. That is why attention has to be guarded. If you let it be taken by everything, your future starts getting built by accident. A little distraction here, a little scrolling there, a little emotional noise, a little comparison, a little mental clutter. And by the end of the day, your mind feels spent without having moved anything important forward. That is not harmless, because the life you want is not built only through effort. It is built through sustained attention, through the ability to stay with what matters long enough for it to deepen, sharpen, and compound. Without that, even good intentions stay weak. You may care about change, but if your mind keeps getting pulled in 10 directions, that care never gathers enough force to become transformation. This is where the rule becomes serious. You have to stop treating your attention like something the world is free to spend for you. Not every message deserves instant access to your mind. Not every thought deserves a seat at the table. Not every distraction deserves the right to break your momentum. Some things must be delayed, ignored, reduced, or cut off completely if you want your life to become more focused than your impulses. That takes maturity, because attention leaks quietly. You do not always feel it happening. You just feel the result. A weaker mind, a shorter attention span, less depth, less patience, less power to stay with difficult work. Then one day you wonder why your goals still feel far away, while your real problem is that your focus has been getting emptied into things that never deserved that much of you. Stoicism would bring you back to one simple truth here. What you repeatedly attend to becomes part of you. If your attention lives in noise, your inner world becomes noisy. If it lives in conflict, your mind becomes more agitated. If it lives in comparison, your peace gets thinner. But if it begins living in discipline, clarity, and useful work, then your life starts taking on that shape instead. That is the opportunity. And this is why guarding attention is not just about productivity. It is about identity. It is about deciding what gets to influence your mind every day. It is about choosing what kind of inner life you are building through repeated focus. So protect the first hours of the day. Protect the hour that belongs to your future. Protect the moments when your mind is strongest. Notice what scatters you. Notice what steals more time than it deserves. Notice what leaves you mentally thin afterward. Then take that seriously. Because attention is never just passing through, it is building something. And if your future really does depend on what you keep giving your mind to, then this rule is not optional. Guard your attention carefully, and your life begins holding its shape. Lose it carelessly, and everything you want becomes harder to build than it needs to be. The 10th rule: build habits that change who you are. This is where change either becomes real or stays temporary. You can push hard for a few days. You can have a strong week. You can even create a burst of motivation that makes you feel completely different for a moment. But if your effort is not turning into habit, then it is not changing your identity yet. It is only creating short-term intensity, and intensity fades fast. That is why habits matter so much. They are not just actions you repeat. They are evidence of who you are becoming. Every repeated action sends a message to your mind. It says, this is what we do now. This is how we live now. This is the standard. And once that message is repeated enough times, it starts becoming part of your self-image. That is the real shift. You are no longer just trying to wake up earlier. You are becoming someone who does not negotiate with the morning. You are no longer just trying to train. You are becoming someone who moves their body as a matter of identity. You are no longer just trying to focus better. You are becoming someone who protects their attention on purpose. That difference changes everything, because temporary effort still depends too much on emotion. It comes and goes with how inspired, disciplined, or determined you happen to feel that week. But identity-based habits go deeper. They stop asking every day, do I want to do this? They start saying, this is who I am now. That is where life begins to stabilize. Stoicism would respect this deeply because it understands that character is built through repetition. Not through one grand moment, but through daily acts that slowly teach the mind what kind of person it is serving. If the repetition is weak, identity stays weak. If the repetition is strong, identity starts hardening in the right direction. This is why you should care less about looking impressive for 1 week and more about becoming reliable to yourself across many days. A quiet habit, repeated long enough, will change you more deeply than a dramatic effort that disappears the moment life becomes inconvenient. And this is where patience matters too. At first, the habit can feel small, almost unimpressive. But that is often how real identity change begins. In actions that look ordinary from the outside but are becoming foundational on the inside. You keep the promise. You repeat the behavior. You stop arguing with it. Little by little, your mind stops treating it like effort and starts treating it like normal. That is powerful, because once the right behavior becomes normal, your future stops depending on constant self-battles. You are no longer dragging yourself through every task. You are moving from a different baseline, a stronger one. So this rule is not asking you to try harder in random bursts. It is asking you to build habits that tell the truth about who you are becoming. Choose actions you can repeat. Protect them. Keep them small enough to stay alive, but serious enough to matter. Then repeat them until they stop feeling like a phase and start feeling like you. Because the goal is not to force change for a few days. The goal is to become someone whose daily habits make going backward feel unnatural. The 11th rule, measure what is real, not what you wish were true. A lot of stagnation survives because it stays unmeasured. As long as something remains vague, the mind can protect it. It can pretend the habit is not that frequent, the distraction is not that costly, the progress is not that slow, the effort is better than it really is. Vague thinking is comfortable because it leaves room for illusion. But illusion does not build a better life. This is why measurement matters. Not because you need to become obsessed with numbers, but because truth becomes sharper when it is tracked. The moment you start measuring something honestly, it becomes harder to lie to yourself about it. The pattern becomes visible, the inconsistency becomes visible, the gap between what you say and what you actually do becomes visible. That can feel uncomfortable, but it is useful. Because what you refuse to measure usually gains quiet control over you. If you never track your time, time disappears without resistance. If you never track your habits, weakness keeps calling itself once in a while. If you never track your focus, distraction keeps pretending it is harmless. The mind loves what stays blurry, because blurry things are easier to excuse. Measurement removes that fog. Suddenly the question is no longer, do I think I'm doing better? Now it becomes, what do the last 7 days actually show? That is a stronger question. It brings you out of mood and into reality. It stops your progress from depending on whatever story your mind is telling that day. And that makes change more honest. This is one of the reasons people stay stuck longer than they need to. They judge themselves by intention, not by evidence. They count what they meant to do. They count how serious they feel. They count how much they care. But life changes through what is repeated, not through what is wished for. That is why the truth has to be seen. Maybe you need to measure your mornings. Maybe you need to track your deep work. Maybe you need to face how often you break your own routine. Maybe you need to see clearly what you are consuming, avoiding, or postponing. Whatever it is, once it is visible, it becomes workable. That is the gift of measurement. It may humble you at first, but it also gives you something solid to build from. Now you are no longer wrestling with a vague sense that things are off. You can point to something, you can adjust something, you can improve something specific. Stoicism would respect that kind of honesty. It asks you to look at yourself without decoration, not harshly, but clearly, not to attack yourself, but to stop hiding from the facts that could help you grow. Because if you keep wishing reality were different without measuring what is actually happening, your life stays governed by guesswork. And guesswork is weak ground. So this rule is simple, but it cuts deep. Measure what is real. Track the habit. Track the hours. Track the effort. Track the pattern. Bring the truth into the light, even if it bruises your pride a little. Because once truth becomes visible, control starts returning to you. The 12th rule, detach from results. Devote yourself to the process. This rule is hard because the mind loves proof. It wants to see the result quickly. It wants confirmation that the work is paying off, that the effort means something, that the change is visible enough to calm your doubts. And when that proof is slow, the temptation is to become restless. You start checking too often, expecting too much, and letting the outcome decide whether your discipline stays alive. That is dangerous, because the moment your energy becomes too attached to results, your peace starts depending on things you cannot fully control. Timing is not fully yours. Outcomes are not fully yours. Other people are not fully yours. Even your own progress does not always reveal itself on your preferred schedule. So if you keep asking results to motivate you every day, you will become unstable very quickly. This is where Stoicism becomes a real anchor. It teaches you to place your loyalty somewhere deeper than the outcome, not because results do not matter, but because the process is where your actual power lives. The work, the repetition, the standard, the next honest action. That is the part that belongs to you, and that is enough to devote yourself to. Because when your attention stays on the process, something important happens. Your days become cleaner. You stop performing effort just to get emotional reassurance. You stop panicking every time progress looks quiet. You stop turning one slow week into a full crisis about your future. You return to the only place that can actually build the result anyway. Today's work, today's discipline, today's choice. That shift protects your mind. It keeps you steady when the outside evidence is not dramatic yet. It lets you continue even when the reward is delayed. It teaches you to respect the craft of becoming instead of constantly demanding proof that you are already there. That is a much stronger way to live. And strangely, it usually improves the results too, not because you are trying less, but because you are trying with less desperation. Your effort gets cleaner when it is not constantly interrupted by emotional checking. You think better. You stay more consistent. You waste less energy on doubt. This is why detachment is not indifference. It is discipline. You still care about the result. You still work for it seriously. But you stop asking it to feed you every day. You stop making your emotional state depend on whether life is showing visible reward yet. You let the result arrive when it arrives, while you keep devoting yourself to what is in your hands. That is strength. So this rule asks you to become more loyal to the process than to the applause, the proof, or the pace. Let the process shape you. Let it steady you. Let it become the place where your self-respect is built. Because if you can stay devoted before the result appears, then when the result finally does come, it will be resting on something real. The 13th rule: stay consistent through the flat days. This is where change stops being exciting and starts becoming real. Because there comes a point when the first energy fades. The decision still matters, the goal still matters, the structure is still there, but the emotional charge is gone. Nothing feels dramatic, nothing feels new. The work starts feeling ordinary, and the mind begins whispering dangerous things. Maybe this is not working, maybe this is enough, maybe you can ease off now. That is the flat season, and it matters more than the high-energy beginning. The beginning is easy to love because it feels alive. You are inspired, clear, and emotionally invested. But the flat days are different. They ask for something deeper than excitement. They ask whether you can stay loyal when the process feels plain, when the results are quiet, when the work no longer gives you a rush just for showing up. That is where consistency becomes powerful, because flat days are where a lot of people lose the life they were trying to build, not through one dramatic failure, but through a soft drift, a little less effort, a little less focus, a few missed standards that start sounding harmless. Nothing looks catastrophic, but the direction slowly weakens. That is why this rule matters so much. You have to understand that flat does not mean wrong. It often means the process is becoming normal. It means you are no longer being carried by novelty. So now character has to take over. That is not a bad sign. It is one of the clearest signs that your discipline is being asked to mature. This is where self-respect gets tested. Can you keep doing what matters when the reward is not emotional? Can you stay with the routine when it no longer feels special? Can you hold the standard when the day feels average and your mind keeps trying to convince you that average days do not count? They count a lot. In fact, they build more than the dramatic days do, because flat days teach you how to continue without needing constant encouragement from your feelings. They teach you how to make progress without turning every day into a performance. They strengthen the part of you that knows how to keep going quietly, even when nothing outside is telling you to be impressed with yourself yet. That is how identity hardens, not when the work feels heroic, but when it feels ordinary and you still do it well. That is when discipline stops being a phase and starts becoming part of your structure. So, if a day feels flat, do not treat that as a reason to loosen everything. Treat it as training. Let the day be plain. Let the process be repetitive. Let the work feel simple if it wants to feel simple. Then do it anyway. Because the goal is not to feel extraordinary every day. The goal is to become someone who can keep the standard even when the day feels quiet, unremarkable, and emotionally unimpressive. That is what makes the change last. The 14th rule: become unrecognizable in 90 days, or regret staying the same. This is where everything becomes personal, not motivational, not theoretical. Personal. Because after all the structure, all the discipline, all the rules, the real question is still the same. What will these 90 days do to you? Will they pass through your hands the way so many other seasons did? Full of intention, full of promises, full of plans that sounded serious for a moment, then slowly disappeared into the same old habits? Or will these 90 days mark the point where your life stopped drifting and started taking your shape? That is the choice now, and it is heavier than it sounds, because staying the same never feels dramatic in the moment. It feels familiar, manageable, easy to postpone. You tell yourself you still have time. You tell yourself you will get more serious next week, next month, after things settle down. But that delay has a price. It compounds quietly. And one day you look up and realize the cost was not only time, it was momentum, self-respect, clarity, the version of you that could have existed by now if you had started when you first knew better. That is why these 90 days matter so much. They are long enough to change your pace, long enough to harden your standards, long enough to become calmer, sharper, more disciplined, and less available for the habits that used to keep pulling you backward. Long enough to look at the version of you that has been repeating the same excuses and finally say, you are not leading anymore. That is a serious shift. Because becoming unrecognizable does not mean becoming fake. It does not mean building some polished image for other people to admire. It means becoming so different in your discipline, your focus, your emotional control, your daily standards, and your relationship with yourself that the old life no longer fits you. The old mornings do not fit. The old distractions do not fit. The old weakness does not fit. The old excuses do not fit. That is the kind of change you are after. And it will not happen through one big moment. It will happen through the quiet accumulation of kept promises, the mornings you honored, the hours you protected, the impulses you did not obey, the discomfort you stopped escaping, the attention you guarded, the habits you repeated until they stopped feeling like effort and started feeling like identity. That is how someone becomes unrecognizable in the best sense. Not overnight, not through hype, through proof. And if you do not do that, then another outcome is waiting. Regret. Not loud regret at first. Quiet regret. The kind that sits behind the eyes when you know you are capable of more, but keep choosing what weakens you. The kind that grows when your days stop matching your potential. The kind that comes from knowing you did not lose to life. You lost to hesitation, inconsistency, and the habit of waiting for the perfect emotional state before finally taking yourself seriously. That is the truth. So do not waste these 90 days trying to look transformed. Use them to become transformed. Let the changes be real enough that they show up in your posture, your routines, your attention, your self-command, and the way you move through ordinary days when nobody is watching, because that is where the real victory is. Not in talking about change, not in planning change, in becoming someone whose daily life now tells the truth about it. And if you do that honestly, these 90 days will not just improve your life a little. They will leave you standing so differently that your old self would barely know how to speak for you anymore. So this is what the whole challenge really comes down to. Not whether change is possible, not whether you are capable, not whether life has given you enough reasons to finally take yourself seriously. The real question is simpler and harder. Will you use these 90 days with intention, or will you let them dissolve the same way other months disappeared? Because time does not stop and ask who is ready. It moves, it keeps moving, and while it moves, something is always being built. Either stronger habits or weaker ones, either a steadier mind or a more distracted one. Either a version of you that can be trusted more deeply, or a version that keeps saying the right things while living in the same old pattern. That is what makes this serious. These 90 days are not just a block of time. They are a mirror. They will show you what happens when your standards finally become stronger than your moods. They will show you what your life starts becoming when focus is protected, weakness is cut off, pain is faced honestly, and discipline is treated like a structure instead of a temporary emotion. And if you really live these rules, something will change that goes deeper than results. You will start trusting yourself more. That may be the most important transformation of all. The way you look at yourself will begin to shift, not because you became perfect, but because you stopped abandoning your own future in small daily ways. You stopped making excuses sound intelligent. You stopped waiting to feel inspired before acting like your life mattered. You stopped negotiating with the parts of you that keep choosing comfort over growth. That changes a person. It changes the way you wake up. It changes the way you carry hard days. It changes the way you speak to yourself when the work feels flat. It changes the way you move through the world when you know, quietly, that you are no longer the same person who kept breaking his own word. That is what 90 days can do. Not magic, not fantasy. Proof. Proof that discipline can become identity. Proof that consistency can rebuild self-respect. Proof that your life can move when you stop feeding what weakens you and start protecting what strengthens you. So if you are going to do this, do it honestly. Do it fully. Do it without performance. Let these 90 days become the season where you finally stop talking about who you could be and start living in a way that makes that person visible. Because the truth is, 90 days from now will arrive whether you use them or not. The only question is whether you will arrive there as the same person, carrying the same excuses, repeating the same cycles, or whether you will meet that day with a stronger mind, cleaner habits, steadier focus, and a life that finally looks like it belongs to someone who chose to change. That choice is in front of you now, and it is heavier than it seems, because one path gives you discomfort with growth. The other gives you comfort with regret.